if you have this sheet out while you're going through this, that'll be probably the most helpful. We're going to be in the homework section, the homework notes section of that page. What I'm going to do is, as you can see, I've got a PowerPoint that I'm going to kind of go over with you, and we're going to hit up on the highlights of the purpose of colonies reading that you did in class today and maybe had to finish after class. The image that you're looking at right now, is just the image that I want you to kind of think of when we're talking about mercantilism, when we're talking about this idea of the purpose of colonies. Here you have this overbearing presence that's able to just go in and take, whatever it wants, whatever he wants, and the babies are obviously going to at some point come to symbolize the colonies. We're going to have to talk about that quite a bit as U.S. history will focus more on the colonies. So just to review, our goal for this lesson is to talk about this question of when mercantilism exists, what is the nature of the relationship, the key being here the relationship between mother country and colony. All I want to do right now is just go over some of this key vocabulary and specifically some of the things that I asked you to highlight from the reading today. So for example, we'll take a look at this idea of mercantilism. Now this is by no means, as I can change spelling right there, this is by no means a comprehensive definition. We will talk more about mercantilism in class tomorrow. But just to give you an idea, this idea of mercantilism is that it's an economic system first and foremost. It's an economic system that most of the countries that we're going to be talking about in this era of colonialization, this era of imperialism, were using as the primary basis of economics. And it holds that nations, like a country like Spain at the outset, and then eventually more important for us will be England, should do what they can to increase their wealth. And the key that they found to increasing their wealth was this idea of favorable balance of trade, which we will define more clearly here in a couple minutes. Mercantilism also held that the more wealth that a nation had, or the more wealthy a nation was, the more powerful it would be. And that we could talk tomorrow about what that means, but in general, the idea that they can afford more soldiers, they can afford more weapons. And then lastly, and this is going to be the important thing for U.S. history, is this idea of increasing access to resources. That becomes the key. And that's a good transition to this idea of favorable balance of trade. So if we look at this idea of favorable balance of trade, what we're talking about is the idea that if I'm going to trade with you goods, you're going to trade goods back to me, and hopefully there's some kind of balance between you have what I need and I have what you need. But what countries realized is if they wanted to make a profit, they would be better off if they could trade something that they didn't necessarily need for goods that they wanted or needed, or even better yet, if they could not have to bring anything in but simply sell as much as they could. So the idea of favorable balance of trade is, in its simplest, is that this goal for the country would be to buy less than you would sell, or as you see I have it written here, if the goal is to make a profit, you want to sell more than you buy. I mean, this seems pretty simple, but if we put it in the context of like a nation, the idea is to export more than you import, remembering that wealth equals power, money equals power. So if I am exporting more than I import, that means that I want to rely on other countries for stuff as little as possible, but I want them to need my stuff as much as possible. And so obviously, I shouldn't say obviously, so then what's ideal is if you can get a product that everybody else needs and that you have and that nobody else has. And if you can do that with as many different products as possible, the better off you're going to be. And so if we go from favorable balance of trade then to this other idea that I asked you to look at, which is the country that we're going to be most worried about is England. And as they started to get involved in this idea of colonization, of grabbing colonies, what lessons were available to them because a country came before them. And the couple of key things that I would pull out from what they learned from Spain is, first, the idea of just that you could make money by investing in colonies. That was new. We take that for granted. We look at history, we think explorers, colonies, all of that makes sense, but it didn't make sense to them. There's a reason why it takes England almost 100 years before they really start to colonize, and it's because the idea of making money was not a known idea. And so the first lesson is that they England realized by Spain's experience that they could profit from the colonies. And the second thing, and this is more important, I'm going to flip back here real quick just to show you this last part here, right? Export more than you import, and then this idea of back here, increasing access to resources was the key. So if I come back to this slide, you could increase what you have by acquiring new territories and colonies. So for example, England is big into shipbuilding, and what you need for shipbuilding is really tall trees. You need very tall trees for the lumber to make masts, for example, that you put the sails on. Well, in New England, eventually, when they get New England, they were going to acquire a lot of that territory that had huge supplies of lumber. This is big because now they don't have to buy that from anybody else. That becomes something that they have. So you have to think about, if you think about a tiny little country like England, they're limited in what resources they have based on what they have at home. But if they begin to increase what equals home, that is, if they begin to bring in territories, now all of a sudden you have a very different idea of what is yours and what you have access to. And remember, this is not just gold. It's things like tobacco, cotton, lumber, timber, other agricultural products. The more of that you could make yours, the better off. You would be better off, your economy would be, the more money that you can make. And of course, the more money you're making, the more powerful you are. You getting used to this yet? I'm not getting used to this yet. It may take a little while. I guess I should throw in there, don't hesitate to pause to take notes if you need to, or if you need to go back and look at something. I think you should have the ability to rewind and look at whatever it is that you need to look at. Okay? I'm going to advance to the next slide, and we're going to talk specifically about what we need to worry about, which is what the United States is, and that's the colony, or what the United States was, and that's the colony. So if we think about this idea of what is the role of the colony, what does the colony have to do in this game of mercantilism, or in this economic system of mercantilism? It's pretty simple. And I want to go back to this for just 1 second. Okay, remember our goal is we're saying when mercantilism exists, right? Oops, sorry. When mercantilism exists. Well, we're assuming for this slide that mercantilism exists. That means that the colonies are doing what they're supposed to. So that's really when I say what is the role of the colony, that is what is the colony supposed to be doing. In a mercantile system, a colony is supposed to provide raw materials. What are raw materials? Lumber, tobacco, cotton, wool, different raw materials that they could send back to England, and then England could take those things and make them into something. So things, like sugar, the mother country can take it and make products out of it. So the colony should be providing those raw materials. The colonies should be doing everything in their power. What they are doing is meant to benefit the wealth of the mother country, period. Everything in mercantilism is supposed to benefit the wealth of the mother country. They should be obedient and follow laws like any other group that lives under a monarch's rule or a country's rule. And this is really getting specific to England and what will become the United States. They should purchase the mother country's goods. So, and we'll talk quite a bit about this over the next few days, but if you think about the wood in New England, let's say a piece of lumber in New England, it gets sent to England to be finished. Well, they finish it into something. Let's just say they make a dining room table out of it. Well, that dining room table might come back to the colonies, and it's an expectation that the colonists will buy that. They become a new market. So that's the role of the colony in a perfect setting, in real mercantilism. So then this brings us to this last question that I want to talk about today, which is, what does this relationship depend on? That is, if mercantilism is going to exist, if it's going to happen and it's going to work, what has to be true? And there are several assumptions in a mercantile relationship. There are several things that we're just assuming are going to be true, and these will happen so that mercantilism can work, right? First, the colony has to be resource rich. If they would have landed in Arizona and all they saw was desert, they probably would have never come back, because what were they going to get out of there? But the fact that they land in New England and they land in Virginia, and these are the first places that the English come, they're able to find resources that they could use. So it has to be resource rich. The native population either will help or move along. So, when we talk about this, when you look at the Spanish, they come across the Native Americans, Well, the Native Americans were in the way, but because they didn't have any immunities to European diseases, they just start to die off. Whereas with the Americans, they just start to kind of push the natives back, and they start to settle slowly, and they have a lot of issues at the outset with the natives. And we'll talk more about that when we get specific into the colonization of the New World. But the assumption is that the natives are either going to help or get out of the way. And then lastly, if people from the mother country go to the colonies, like we know the English will, we know that the 13 colonies will be populated by people from England. If people from the mother country go to the colonies, they will remain loyal and committed to the goals of mercantilism. They will be doing everything in their power to benefit the wealth of the mother country. They do not think of themselves as anything else other than subjects of England, part of this economic system. That's our key. If we're going to have true mercantilism, the people have to continually believe this, that England is more important than them, that what they're doing is meant to benefit England. They could profit personally, but really all of the profits needed to be going back to the mother country. Okay, so just to kind of review, and this would be a good place for you to kind of start to think about that bottom section. We won't do that until after the activity tomorrow, but our goal is for this lesson is to think about when mercantilism exists. I'm going to stop there and just reemphasize. We're talking about when mercantilism exists in its purest form. So when there actually is that economic relationship, when everything is perfect. What is the nature of the relationship between mother country and colony? And what I would encourage you to do is maybe on the back of the note sheet, or in your notebook, just jot down some ideas in terms of relationship. Because what I've built up right now is you've read about this idea of the purpose of colonies, and I've explained to you how mercantilism should work. And what we're going to do in class tomorrow is we're going to take a look at specifically the relationship. If you've had any questions while you're going through this, feel free to go back and look at it again or rewind to specific places. If you still have questions in how this matches up with the reading, be sure to use that middle section of the note sheet. I'm pointing to it, I don't know if you can really see it, but the middle section of the note sheet to write down questions, because the first thing that I'll do in class tomorrow is I'll ask what kind of questions that you still have. Hopefully this is working, and if you have any other questions right now or immediate concerns, you can email me. This was the first one. Hopefully they'll get better. I will see you in class tomorrow.